Good night and welcome to another edition of In Touch with me, Jadia Japierre Emmanuel. Thank you so much for joining us. Please call someone and let them know that the program is on. We are streaming live on Choice, www.choice39.tv. We are also live on Carry FM. Tonight we will be discussing Wasco and water. We have heard water is life, and of late we have been hearing Wasco needs money too. It gives you a very good idea as to where exactly Wasco is financially and what needs to be done to ensure that we get this company back on the right footing, that is. In April 2013, Wasco was granted a 66.15% increase, 10.43% of which is to be set aside for the dredging of the John Compton Dam. At the time, the dam, which has a capacity of 2.8 million cubic meters of water, could only contain 1.9 million cubic meters. That in itself spells a problem. The dredging of the dam is estimated to cost over $20 million over a 5-year period. In 2012, when the application for the increase was made, Wasco's debt stood at $96 million. Lucelec accounted for $12 million, and PAYE owed to the Inland Revenue Department was $3.43 million. The Water and Sewage Company was also in the bad books of many customers who would go for months without a drop of water or would have to endure poor quality when Wasco was able to supply them with water. In November 2012, Wasco's employees staged a week-long sick-out, and after the company failed to announce a definite date for payment for retroactive pay, they took to the streets and demanded answers from the authorities. All of this indicated to me that whoever took on the challenge and responsibility to lead Wasco's transformation would have to be very brave, very patient, very skillful, and in my opinion, very close to a magician. In November 2013, former Managing Director of the St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority, former Director on the Executive Board of the Organization of American States Committee on Ports, former Chief Executive Officer of the Anguilla Air and Seaports Authority, and former of many things, as he has served in many capacities in St. Lucia, in the region, and also in the world, Mr. Vincent Hippolyte took on that challenge to nurse Wasco back to good health. I recall Dr. James Fletcher, in his introduction of Mr. Hippolyte to the media, said, and I quote, "The new managing director brings with him the right blend of skills and experiences that can take Wasco to the next level," end of quote. 1 year later, we are graced with the presence of Mr. Vincent Hippolyte, who will give an account of some of the changes that have occurred at Wasco, because we have seen the changes. We are hearing of disconnection notices, something that is new to Wasco too. And we will also speak to plans for the immediate and long-term future of Wasco. Good night, Mr. Hippolyte, and welcome to In Touch.
Good night, and thank you.
I thank you so much for taking time out from your schedule. We have been trying to meet so that we can have this discussion. And I understand that it is a very hectic schedule, that you have been engaged not just in dealing with domestic issues, but also by seeking to go beyond St. Lucia's shores to get new friends for Wasco, new interest in Wasco, so that you can take Wasco where it needs to go. You have a very difficult task on your shoulders. Quite apart from managing Wasco, the internal issues, you have to manage us too, the consumers, because many persons are not too happy with Wasco. How has it been like for the year that you have been at the helm?
I guess I would start by saying that it has been challenging, but interesting.
As expected.
Yes. Challenging, but interesting. I say so because upon assuming the position of Managing Director in November, some 6 weeks or 5 weeks later, I had to deal with the trough.
Yes.
And it's not just me, but the entire management team and the family of Wasco. And we had to figure out how to deal with that because it came as a surprise. And we had to also make sure that at all times we remain very mindful that the people of St. Lucia wanted water, and they were just as surprised as ourselves. So they were not ready for that situation, and they were looking to Wasco to do everything possible in order to ensure that they don't suffer too much. So we were carrying that kind of burden on our shoulders, the management team, the board of directors, and the employees of Wasco, and we tried our very best.
Do you know what really was a surprise for St. Lucia? How Wasco managed that trough. I think we had gotten accustomed to certain mindsets. Lack of communication between Wasco and the public. You never know when there will be no water. You never know what is causing. You just assume it's because of the heavy rains. But Wasco, this is when we actually saw the changes coming to life. And the Prime Minister actually praised Wasco for its quick response and for also maintaining communication with the public, that people knew what exactly was wrong and what was being done to bring water to their taps. And I think from the get-go, I really must congratulate you and, like you said, your team. The persons who came together to ensure that the communication part was okay, and to ensure too that the engineers and the technicians and other members of staff were going out there to assess the damage and to make a determination as to how they would proceed to put water back into our taps. So on that front, I think Wasco did a great job.
Yes, and oftentimes people are going to criticize the employees of Wasco and criticize the company, and quite rightly so. But having spent some time at Wasco, I must admit that Wasco does have very good people, very skilled people. I think Wasco's problem over the years is the fact that Wasco is not a company known to be communicating with anybody. And that creates a problem.
Yes.
Because Wasco would do a job, and do a very good job at that, I must admit. But Wasco says nothing. So people get upset, people are angry, and Wasco still says nothing. So it's a kind of a culture that we must deal with internally at Wasco, and also help our publics out there to also deal with the wider culture that Wasco exists in, so that together we can make the difference. Because remember that Wasco by itself will not be able to make that difference, because the responsibility, the job to be done is just huge, and we need the public to assist us along the way as we seek to make the difference.
Sure. When we spoke of Wasco in the past, what always came to the fore was the financial situation, that we are over our heads in debt, and as a result of that, we are not able to maneuver. We cannot seek loans because our balance sheet is not in order. We are owing Lucilec, we are owing the government of St. Lucia, and because of our financial situation, we are not able to invest to improve our plans. Where is Wasco right now in terms of the finances? Because when that application for the increase came, that was what was on the table, that we need to get our finances in order so that we can provide a better service. Have things improved?
Well, I think we have to look at, when we speak of finance in Wasco, we really have to put it in two tranches, or rather compartmentalize it. The first compartment, if I may call it this, is to look at Wasco's operations and to determine what is required financially for Wasco to be able to carry out its operations and satisfy the expectations of its publics. So that is one. The second one is to determine what level of investment Wasco would need to make in order to ensure that it can continue to serve the public way into the future in a sustainable way. So one, you must raise enough money so that you can make investments, you can replace assets, and you can do those kind of things which are crucial for the future and crucial for stability and sustainability. And on the first front, you must make sure you can run the company, which is to pay salaries, to pay your bills, to pay Lucilec, and to do all those things that are necessary for the operations of the company and to keep it going. Now, on the first front, which is on the operations front, the 66.15%, and as you quite correctly said, that was an overall increase that was granted to Wasco, out of which 10.43% had to be excised and set aside for the purpose of building a fund to be able to desilt and rehabilitate the John Compton Dam. So if you remove the 10.43, then you're left to 55.72%. So that is the effective increase that you have. But let's look at that in figures. That increase actually brought in $1.7 million to Wasco monthly. Before that, Wasco was making about $3.3 million monthly. And I'm talking about billings, I'm not talking about collections because there's a difference.
Yes.
So on the billing side, Wasco increased its intake by 1.7%. But bear in mind that Wasco was unable to pay PAYE, which is income taxes to the state. Wasco was unable to remit payments to the NIC. Wasco was unable to pay Lucelec at the time. And Wasco had run up a debt of $11 million to Lucelec. And Lucelec was clamoring for that money, for that debt to be settled, to be paid, and so on. And Wasco had to enter a deal with Lucelec to pay that debt back. So the 1.7 was the difference that Wasco got. That's the effective difference monthly that Wasco got. Lucelec's bill to Wasco on a monthly basis ranges between $850,000 to $1.2 million. Now you heard I said the difference was 1.7.
Yes.
So if $1.2 million out of 1.7 is taken to pay your power cost, then you are left with just $500,000.
Then we have to deal with salaries and...
No, the salaries and so on, they're dealt with
Okay.
But even that was not enough to meet all of those costs because those costs are increasing. Now I talk about billings. I haven't spoken about collections yet because then collections would be a factor or rather a percentage of billing. And if it's very low, although you would bill 4.7, you may just collect $3 million or $3.2 million unless you take a very strong approach to make sure that people actually pay their bills because like you quite correctly said at the start, Wasco needs money too.
Yes.
So it puts us in a situation where you have to pay out of the 1.7 because you were not paying before, you have to pay 1.2 as high as 1.2. And if you then have to pay this because of the surcharges and so on,
yes,
and you cannot pass it on, so you absorb it and you pay it. On top of that, you have to retire the debt that you owe to Lucelec and you pay $272,000 monthly to retire that debt. So 1.2 plus 2.7 gives you 1.472. 1.472 from 1.7, it gives you an idea of what you're left with. Now, what you're left with now, in terms of just that difference, you have to meet new cost that you didn't have before. By the time you examine the 1.7, then you realize that you have nothing to deal with investment. So in terms of whether you're able to do the investments that are necessary to take the company where it should go, you realize that no, you can't. But then the question is, can there be a way for you to begin to approach it? Can we think and say that we must begin to look at ways to do things with little or with near nothing? Now, I sound like a guy who's perhaps a little mad. I was about to say you sound like the Prime Minister
do.
Well, I mean, you know,
because he's been singing this song of doing more with less.
With less.
Because of the environment that we're in.
Because the reality is what it is. I mean, you know, when you think of the reality that is before us, I mean, we can scream, shout, run, hide, and so on. It's not going to go away. True. It's a reality that we must face and we must confront. True. So the question is, the people of St. Lucia, they still want water. The people of St. Lucia, they want the rates of water to be affordable. The people of St. Lucia, they look to Wasco, Wasco's leadership, Wasco's management, to be able to deliver on that promise and that expectation.
Yes.
So if I sit in the position with my management team and the board, then we have that duty. So we cannot go to the people and say, well, we have no money and preach that song alone. We must say, with no money, but this is what we can do, and this is what we're trying to do. But you will have to, as time goes by, you'll have to contribute more by way of rates, because it's impossible to continue without looking at the rates. But there is one big elephant in the room, and that is, out of 100% water that we produce, we are only getting revenue from 44%, an estimated 44%. So it means that we are losing 56% of that water. And we call it non-revenue water, meaning that 56%.
What accounts for that?
Well, there are many factors associated with non-revenue water. One is the fact that your infrastructure is bad. So we call that the physical loss. Meaning that there are lots of leaks and the pipes are not so good. Some of our pipelines are over 100 years old, they're 70 years old, they're 60 years old. So they are leaking on the ground. But these are our pipelines. These are not domestic pipelines, meaning your pipeline to your house.
Right.
These are the trunks and the mains and the raw water lines and the distribution lines that we have, and our valves and our tanks and all of those places where water go leaking all the time. And that's because the infrastructure has not been attended to sufficiently and properly over the years, because Wasco had no money to do that. So that is one place where you lose all that money, all that water. The second area where a lot of water is lost and unaccounted for is the broad area of commercial losses, and that is people stealing our water. You know, because today, you know, we make connections using PVC pipes and so on.
Yes.
It's very easy for people to connect and to steal water. So we find ourselves now where we have to address that problem. You know, theft is a crime, but people will take the chances. So Wasco must also measure up to that. Wasco must behave professionally but strong to deal with a problem like this. Because if you don't, then you will never win. If you believe it's going to go away by you just not addressing it, it will not go away, and you will have it. In fact, it's going to get worse. And then thirdly, we have the problem of just the social loss, which is, for example, like the fire service, you know, which is a necessary service.
Yes.
And it uses water for all kinds of reasons. Some is for just, you know, drills and so on, and some for firefighting. And it's the legislation or laws that makes provisions for that and so on. So this is what makes up this non-revenue water that we speak so much about.
There is a portion of the non-revenue water that I think most of us see almost every day. And that is where we have pipes that are leaking. Now, usually, in our culture, if a pipe is leaking beyond the meter, there would be swift action, and the owner would take responsibility for it, because they realize that they would be billed for it because it passes through. If it is before, you usually find that either they are not in a position to deal with it because there is no valve where you can close it off, or while in some instances where you may be able to close it off, the attitude is that I'm not paying for it, so I really do not care. But in the instances where the residents cannot act and a call is placed to Wasco to say, hello, there is a pipe that is leaking just 1 mile off the Grace Bridge, for example. You're going to work in the morning, you're going to come back in the night, and that pipe is the same way. The next morning you're going to work, you place another call, and there is still no response. So Wasco too is very slow to respond to some of these calls. Are we addressing this internally, and what are some of the difficulties in terms of responding to the fault reports as they come in? Or is it that people just do not report it as they should?
No, I think you're right. As I said earlier, Wasco is not a pretty company in many ways. Wasco is a company that has done a lot of good, but Wasco internally too needs a lot of redevelopment. There is a particular culture, prevailing culture within Wasco that we must deal with internally. We must face ourselves internally and ask ourselves questions and combat the things that are coming at us. We must hear the public and the public cries and so on. Now, I'm saying all of this and I'm sounding like if it's all easy. It's not easy, because you are going up against a particular way of doing things for many years.
An institution.
An institution, right.
Yes.
And the other thing about Wasco too is that although Wasco today is a company, the attitude of Wasco does not reflect that. The attitude of Wasco reflects that of an authority. So now you find yourself in leadership and have to figure out, how do you deal with this? Because the public is not giving you much time. So you have to move quickly. So we are beginning to institute lots of different measures to be able to deal with it. For example, if somebody calls now and says that there is a leak somewhere, the person has access to several different people now at Wasco, including the managing director. And the fact that, because in the interim and in the short run, it will have to be like this, to begin to break the barriers. So people now have access to the managing director to say, well, look, there is that problem. Because you want to break barriers. The public is not giving you a lot of time to do so.
Sure.
So you have to find a way where the barriers can come down very quickly. And the fact that the managing director is aware and then he wants to know that things are addressed in a particular way, then people are beginning to respond. And then you don't just leave it like this. Because if you allow it to go on like this without proper internal education, then you're not winning, you're losing. Because people are only doing it because you are imposing that authority on them. What you want is for them to do it before the imposition of that level of authority. So that is one way. The second thing is after a person has made a call and has said that there's a particular problem, I think we have a duty to call that person back when we have corrected the problem and to confirm that the problem has been corrected, because that was the other problem that we had to.
Yes.
Wasco says I've corrected the problem, and Wasco says that, and Wasco says that, and then the complainant says the problem is still there. So even through the trough and the drought and so on, that kind of attitude was coming forward. But again, I make the point that you don't want that attitude to survive because it's an imposition.
Mm-hmm.
You want that attitude to survive because it has been internalized through education. But in the short run, you have to start with an imposition and then move to internalizing it through a process of sustained education internally.
I'm sure, although you've been there for just about a year, but that is sufficient time, I'm sure you have noticed that one of the biggest problems that Wasco would have is its communication, to speak to people. And you just alluded to it a while ago. After I have dealt with a problem, to say to people that this is what I have done. We have been making changes. There have, a number of changes happening at Wasco, improvements when we speak to the water supply. Currently, there is a redevelopment plan underway for the Mabuya Valley, and I want to speak to that in a little while because there really is a serious problem in that community, View Fort and Dennery. Many persons for years, they have been saying, when will we get water? What exactly is happening in that area? And there is no response. Even to speak to the good, what is happening internally, you do not find that level of interaction between Wasco and the public. We have been seeing some slow changes, but do you think we are where we need to be? And don't you believe that this would be one of the game changers in how people relate to Wasco, so that they can understand too that they have a responsibility to report? There are people who will not call because they would say to you, for many years I've been calling and nothing happens, so why waste my time now? Even though they realize that it is a cost to Wasco and a cost to the country.
Yes. Well, absolutely. There is an absolute need for us to make sure that we make our communication with the public a lot more effective and more efficient. Failure to do this would be failure of Wasco entirely, because the public is really our customer base and they speak to us, and we must communicate with them.
Speaking of Wasco's infrastructure, one of the problems that we have currently is that there are individuals who are complaining that Wasco is saying to them, I'm not able to bring water into your area. There are new developments, government developments, for example, where you have access, infrastructure through roads and so on. But many persons have to depend on connecting a number of pipes, length sometimes as many as 44. And I know that Wasco would have restrictions as to how many they would connect from a main. But we have not seen in recent times, except, well, I recall for Bruceville, new mains or larger pipes going into communities so that people can have access to water. They say to you, I can afford to pay the water, I want to pay it, but Wasco is not making it available to me. Are we seeing any new investments on any scale, small or large, to bring water to some of the new and emerging communities?
That is in fact happening, and it's not just Bruceville that it has happened. We've done that. We've done that too. There are other communities where we have actually done so. Over the years, our water infrastructure, more so our domestic water infrastructure, has developed in a way where we have spaghetti, as we call it, spaghetti lines all over the place. And that is because of what has happened. Places where there were no roads before, now there are roads. Places where there were no houses before, now you have houses. Places where there were roads, now there are houses, and so on. So you find yourself in a situation where that development was moving much quicker than Wasco's ability to make the necessary investment. Not for Wasco to make the necessary investment to respond.
We do for commercial break. We'll do that, and when we come back, we'll continue our discussion with Mr. Vincent Hippolyte, who is the Managing Director of Wasco. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to In Touch. Thank you for staying with us. Again, we're streaming live at www.choice39.tv. We're speaking with Mr. Vincent Hippolyte. He's the Managing Director of Wasco. We spoke a little while ago to the whole issue of infrastructure,
yes,
and being able to give people water as they demand water. And that is a problem in a number of our new developments in a number of our communities.
Yes. I was making the point that while development has moved much quicker than Wasco's ability to make investment to respond, but there is yet another problem that's even bigger, and that is, in a lot of instances, the developments that are private developments are supposed to, the infrastructure for that development is supposed to be provided by the developer. And that is part of what planning requires. So you would find that a developer would go to the planning department, the DCA, and would say that I have a plot of land and I want to subdivide it into so many lots and so on. But then they would also say that I don't have the money up front for me to put in the infrastructure. So can you allow me to sell 3, 4, 5 lots? And with that money, when I've sold it, then I will put in the infrastructure, and then,
familiar story.
Yes. So what would happen is they would say, well, all right, you go ahead and sell 3, 4, and 5 lots, and then use that money to put in the infrastructure. Invariably, the developers, most of them would not do so in the way in which they should. They would show signs and promise that they're going to do it, but they would not do it completely. So they would sell land to some people, and of course, those who would have bought that land, the land would not know what some of the conditions are. They have the expectation that if they buy land, then they're going to build on it, and they would not even ask questions about water and those kind of things. They take all of that for granted. So you find what happens in the end is that the person starts to build and then realize that he or she needs water. So the person starts to then say, well, Wasco, because the developer would say it's Wasco. Then Wasco would say, well, hold on, the developer is supposed to put in that kind of infrastructure. And then the issue then begins to get big.
Yes.
And in some instances, the house is complete, the family is in there, the kids are there, ready to go to school, get up in the morning, and so on, and there is no water. So Wasco finds itself under tremendous pressure when you have 3 or 4 houses in a development, and the water line is somewhere down the road. The developer has not put in the infrastructure to enable that connection. And 5 households, and let us say if you multiply 5 by 6, or no, not so many, but 5 by 4, then you have 20 people that are asking you for water. And they're at you every day. And their voices would grow louder and louder. And eventually what would happen is that in the past, Wasco would say, okay, then you will have to run a line, maybe 10 lanes, 11 lanes, from where you are to where our pipeline is. And you're going to get a connection until the developer puts in the infrastructure, and then your connection would be relocated to the infrastructure. So then you have the spaghetti situation developing in those developments. So that is one scenario. The other scenario is that people, over time, they begin to build their homes on family land, and they go deeper and deeper and further away from the road.
Government land too. And
government lands and so on. And the mains that we have are running on the roadside. But they're all the way in, and then they would cut a road and go in. And over time, then lots of people would build on the side of those roads. But Wasco's infrastructure is where it was. Now Wasco has been unable now to respond to those kind of things, meaning as people are cutting roads and they're going deeper and deeper inland with roads, then Wasco almost simultaneously runs the size of pipe that is necessary so that people can connect. This does not happen that way. As again, I showed you the scenario of the operating scenario and then the investment scenario. So the pressure builds up again. And people sometimes are so desperate that they would say, yes, I'm going to put in the 10 lanes, I'm going to put in the 11 lanes of pipes.
I know places where it's more than that.
And more than that is a bigger problem. The third problem that's associated with that is the quality of the workmanship. You know, you have a lot of people who call themselves plumbers, but they're not so good at all. So somebody comes and runs PVC pipes for you, and they run several lengths of PVC pipes for you. The connections are not so good, the job is poor. So after 2 months, then you have ruptures, you have problems, and so on. And what would happen is that sometimes you wouldn't even know. But Wasco's meter is close to its main. Yeah. And that length of pipe that's coming to your house is all your business. So the rupture would take place not before the meter, but after the meter. So then you come to Wasco and say, but why am I paying this? In the first instance, you came and you literally struggled with Wasco to get the connection. And somehow Wasco is seeing the scenario of a family with several kids having to go to school, this and that, and all these emotional things over time. Then somehow you make the connection or allow the connection. And then it comes back to you in that way. And then the customer would say to you, well, take the meter out from where it is and bring it closer to my house. But obviously Wasco cannot do that. Right. So you have the spaghetti situation. Now, over time, Wasco has been trying to address the spaghetti situation within its means. It's a slow process. When Wasco gets some help, then Wasco is able to do it a lot quicker. You know, when there is no help, then Wasco does it much slower, because Wasco has to first raise the capital itself to be able to put in. Because you must also bear in mind that dealing with the spaghetti lines is not increasing connections. It's just removing what's already there and reconnecting it. So in other words, if you make an investment, that investment will not generate new revenue to pay back. It is the same revenue that you've been generating. You must find somehow to be able to pay back that. So you can't easily raise money to do that. You have to first make the money to be able to do it. So you see, it's not so easy. And when you begin to understand how complex it is, then you see it. Now, why? It's because of our history. It didn't happen yesterday. It happened many, many years ago. And over time, it just continued because everybody was just trying to get rid of a problem very quickly. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you enable this person to get connected, you were kind of happy and say you got rid of a problem. Not knowing in 2-3 years down the road, that same person is going to be your biggest headache, your biggest problem, and several people like that person is going to magnify the problem for you.
And then you have a situation where if you allow it for one resident,
precisely,
then you have other residents coming to say, well, if you allow this one to connect, then there is absolutely no problem with me running a similar number of lengths of pipe. But is it as difficult to deal with the situation that we just spoke with with regards to our roads? Because there is a situation in many of our communities where the Wasco's main pipe runs on one side of the road.
Yes.
And we have a situation where residents would apply for water, they would be allowed or granted, the application would be approved. Wasco then comes into the communities, sometimes just months after the road has been newly paved, cuts into that road to allow someone access to water, and then that becomes the biggest headache of the community. How do we deal? Firstly, is it Wasco's responsibility to repair that damage, or is it a situation where Wasco pays money to the Ministry of Infrastructure and the Ministry of Infrastructure has a responsibility to repair the road? How does it work?
No, it's actually Wasco's responsibility to
reinstate.
Wasco fails. Yes, indeed. It is Wasco's responsibility to reinstate the road. Now, what we have done, and just let me tell you two things here, going back to the former conversation we had about the spaghetti lines and so on. The Ministry of Planning and ourselves, we have recognized that this is a huge problem, and we have agreed that we need to sit down and find a solution to it. We cannot continue to say that it's beyond us. It is there. It's alive, it's well, but it's very noisy. So we must address it. So the way to address it is to confront it, for us to sit down and to say, this is what we have today, and let us figure out a strategy, a way to deal with it, and to begin to redress it. Now, with respect to the reinstatement of roads, after we have cut through the roads to repair our pipelines, and the reason why we have those problems, and a lot of it in castries and so on, well, I think you're talking about two different scenarios there. Yes. One is making connections where we literally have to cut through the road to do that, and the other one is because we cut and dig because of a leak,
like
where we have to go down, yes,
and you left it open for a while.
Right. Now, the reason for all of this is that one is when there is a leak, because our pipelines are running beneath the roads, when there is a leak, Wasco must go in and repair that leak. So Wasco must dig the road. Unfortunately, this must happen. Now, again, it's the history of how the development took place. Yes. And even today, as I speak, you have a lot of developments that are presenting difficulties for us. And in recent times, we almost allowed the problem to continue. And I'll tell you how. A developer comes again and says that I have this plot of land and I want to develop it. And planning gives permission, and planning also makes certain allowances between the road and the shoulder, and says, okay, your land starts here, and so you don't do anything in this area, and this is. Invariably what happens is that the owner of this land, in putting up his fence, his walls and everything, would bring it all the way to the road's edge, to the edge of the road. That's what will happen. And so you would find in some instances that Wasco's line now is within a person's property, or the person's wall is built on it, and this is all over the place now. So when there's a problem now, Wasco has to go in and do certain things, and Wasco has to remove the line and bring it closer to the road or bring it somewhere else, because...
So Wasco must pay for the developer's indiscretions?
No, what happens is that the private person
yes.
would build on the shoulder and deny, because of building on the shoulder, would deny Wasco that opportunity for Wasco to run its line there, or to move the line from where it is, or even to move the line, because you may have, for example, Entrepot is a case in point. You may have the line now running in the road. And when we have an opportunity, if there is a leak, sometimes we are saying, well, if the line is running in the road, because we may not want to dig the road again, we would move it and bring it on the shoulder. And then we say, but hold on, we can't, because while we can bring it on this property here, but when we look ahead, we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they all have built all the way to the shoulder. And then the problem is, what do you do? Now, to go to these people and say, you break down your walls, you break down this, some of them even they're building their homes, extending their homes all the way to the edge of the road. You know, and some people are actually building and extending their homes on water mains. And that is very dangerous, because you have pressurized lines running beneath homes.
Yes.
Because people are just extending indiscriminately, they're doing those things, and sometimes without planning permission. And by the time you look around, it's already built, it's fully built. And you know the problems associated with all of this, just trying to get somebody to break this down and to recess and so on.
They would go to the Prime Minister, and they would go to the parliamentary rep and seek intervention. But just before we go to a commercial break, the issue of the repairs after Wasco has done it, for every motorist, I know it is a headache. What can be done?
Okay.
Firstly, let me ask, do the customers have to pay? The fact that you have to run your line across the road, would the fee be higher? Or would they just pay a normal fee and then Wasco would take on the financial responsibility of repairing the road?
No, every connection that has to be made when an application is made, then we would determine how much you'll have to pay for that connection to be made to you. Now, the reinstatement has two problems to it. One is the fact that because usually when Wasco cuts the road to do that, Wasco cannot get the material that it requires to repair the road. And the reason for that is because nobody is going to batch such a small quantity of asphaltic concrete for you to reinstate the road. So it doesn't matter how much you go around looking, begging, you're simply not going to get it. And the ministry sometimes is in the same problem too. That is why you have potholes and you have all of this, because we all rely on somebody batching for us. So usually the plant operator would have to wait for an economic load or an economic size, that would make sense for them to batch.
Understood.
Otherwise, unit cost is going to be too high. But if you batch up to the size of plant, then unit cost goes down and it becomes better for everybody. So we almost have to wait until this happens. And now you would notice that what we do in the interim, because the public is so unhappy, we begin to use concrete.
Yes.
And say, well, all right, let us pacify the situation and let us use concrete and put it on the road until such time when we can take the concrete out and thing. And in some areas, you notice we're doing that because it takes so long. And it's difficult to explain to the public. Again, as I say to my guys, it's really not the public, it's us. We have to find ways.
Yes.
And stop explaining and say, well, you know, we just can't find concrete. There's another way to do it. But the big thing I want to say to you is that pretty soon you'll hear the Minister of Infrastructure making an announcement about an MOU between Wasco and the Ministry to deal with this problem. And I suppose that will happen pretty soon.
Great news.
Yeah.
We'll go to a commercial break. When we come back, we'll be speaking about the John Compton Dam, as well as the water situation in the Mabwea Valley, Dennery, and Vieux Fort, as there is a redevelopment plan currently underway. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to In Touch. I'm your host, J.D. Emmanuel, and my guest tonight is the Managing Director of Wasco, Mr. Vincent Hippolyte. I want to touch on the John Compton Dam. It is a major source of concern, so much so that the Prime Minister visited earlier this year along with you and suggested that a joint parliamentary visit be held, and that happened. We saw the members of parliament going in to get a better sense as to what exactly the situation is, and sort of to get the support of both sides of the house that we need to act in order to move forward. How desperate are we in the situation that there needs to be action now? And in your own opinion, and based on the reviews and what has been coming into Wasco, what can we do now to deal with the heavy siltation?
I think firstly, we have to deal with the problem responsibly. That's the most important thing. And not to deal with it emotionally. Okay, now I'm just a manager. That's what I am. So as a manager, I know that the sustainable way to do things is the responsible way to do it. So I take that position. So firstly, the question to be asked is, what exactly is the problem? Do we know what the problem is? And if we don't know what the problem is, before we believe we can go and solve the problem, we need to know what it is. So the first course of action is a study to determine precisely what the problem is. And that is where we are now. I think in earlier press conferences and meeting the press and so on, I explained the preliminary steps to undertaking the study and the process and so on, the procurement process. So we are currently undertaking the study. So the study is on the way as we speak, and a number of things have happened, and we know a number of things about the John Compton Dam. But just to tell you, what is in the reservoir of the John Compton Dam did not originate from the reservoir of the John Compton Dam. It came from somewhere else. So if we do not pay attention to this somewhere else, which is the upper catchment areas, then we would not have solved the problem. What we would do is we would deal with the emotions of it. We would quickly do something that seemingly makes everybody happy until another event comes. And if you look at the pattern of events, just to give you an example, in 1994 we had Debbie, major event, and the dam was under construction at that time. It actually stopped the works in 1994 and caused a reassessment of the designs and the studies and so on, and they felt that everything was okay and continued. In 2010, nearly 14 years, no, more than 14 years, we had Thomas, a major event. That was unheard of. We'd never had such an experience in our life before. And less than 3 years from 2010, last year, we had another major event. And now everybody is nervous. We had a little bit of rain last weekend and we all were nervous.
Yes.
Because we were trying to figure out, is it another trough again? So it says to us now that climate change is upon us in a serious way. And things that were predictable in the past are not so easily predictable anymore. And our design criteria must now give consideration to climate change. Because all the things that we designed and built were built on a different set of assumptions. The assumptions now must be revisited. So even looking at the infrastructure that we have, the dam and so on, you must now factor in retrospectively assumptions to see how we deal with the whole situation. The upper catchment area, as I say, is 15 square kilometers, and we have to determine how we arrest. Now, the Department of Forestry and the Water Resource Management Agency is also very much involved in that process to see what must be done in the upper catchment areas to deal with it. So the study is on the way that is going to tell us precisely what to do and how to do it.
Do we have a time frame? When do we expect the study to be complete?
Okay, well, the study has two big deliverables. One is to put us in a position by the end of January into February next year, put us in a position with tender documents for us to invite proposals to undertake the works. Now, once this happens, then the whole process of procuring services to undertake the works would then kick in, and it would follow the CDB procurement rules. So these rules are very rigid, so you have to do it step by step until you eventually select a person and award a contract and the works start. So all of these are in keeping with that process, and that would be. The second aspect of the study is for the study to tell us how we should go about maintaining, operating the dam way into the future. Because the assumption has been made that you will have those events, and even if you do some work in the upper catchment areas, you will not prevent landslides totally. So over time, you will still have siltation coming into the dam, and you must figure out how you deal with it. How you transport that sediment load, how you take it out of the dam, how you handle it, so that you do not have such a situation on your hand in the way in which you have it today. But there is one big point in this whole thing, as you ask about how critical the situation is.
Yes.
And that is, the dam was built with a design capacity of 3 million cubic meters of water, okay? And you spoke about the 2.8 or 2.9, and that is the 2.8, 2.9 is really reflecting what happened after Debbie. Because Debbie actually brought in silt, and the silt just stayed at the bottom of the reservoir, so it was not removed. So you started with that amount of siltation in the dam, so the capacity was compromised from that time. And then over time, by 2010, it may have had about 200 to 300 cubic meters of silt, and then you had the Thomas coming upon it. But importantly, while we are giving consideration to the silting, we must simultaneously make sure we have a water augmentation plan. Because the demand for water will not change because we are desilting the John Compton Dam. The economy of St. Lucia will not say, well, all right, we'll continue to survive and be nice to you, and when you're finished with the dam, we'll bring ourselves alive again. No, the economy of St. Lucia will demand water and say that as far as we are concerned, for us to survive, which is the tourism sector,
yes,
you have to provide water. Yes. So the duty is, again, to that would have been responsible, is to undertake the job responsibly. So you need to know, because as I have explained before, desilting and rehabilitating the John Compton Dam is like doing open heart surgery. You must keep the patient alive while you're doing the open heart surgery. You do not have the luxury of saying, let the patient die, and when I'm finished, I'm going to bring the patient back to life. You don't have that luxury. In fact, that's an impossibility.
Yes.
But in other countries, like countries in Africa and even in Jamaica currently, because they have more than one reservoir, more than one dam, more than one water system like this, they have the ability to shut down that system, transfer the supply to the connections to another supply, deal with the problem, and when they are finished, reconnect. We don't have that luxury. So again, we're on the drawing board thinking. So we now have to look and see how much water we can get from Varna, how much water we can get from Ravin Poisson, and look around and see where else we can get water. And if we can get enough water, and look at how much water we are going to lose when we are desilting, and say, will we be able to make up that difference from those sources and bring them onto the line through Sarat and up into Cicero and to the public? Then we know we've got it right. It's all that work we must do.
Yes, and it does sound very, very complicated and delicate.
Right. And in addition to this, we must know precisely the profile of the sediment that is lying in the reservoir. If you don't know this, how will you be able to deal with the silting one and the operations and maintenance plan going forward? When the various options to handle it depends on the type of sediment you have and the sediment profile in the reservoir. So for us now, we take a responsible approach to it because the public requires that of us. That while you have the emotional outburst on it, which we understand, the responsibility still remains, and the public is still holding us accountable and still holding us to be responsible. Despite everything that is going on and say, they're still holding us responsible. And if we don't do the job right, they're still going to say that we were in the position to do it.
Yes.
We knew exactly what it was, and we should have done it right. And we must take all those factors into consideration. So it is that duty that guides us every single day as we seek to get the job done right.
Yes, and I'm sure that every single St. Lucia would love Wasco to get it right the first time, because there would be a cost, of course, if we were to go ahead and then would have to turn back. The situation in the Mabia Valley, I'm sure you have gotten a sample of the water from the valley. In fact, the parliamentary representative is making it a gift to everybody who would listen and everybody who would accept it. And that situation there continues. I know that there is a plan to rehabilitate and to ensure that we have, number one, a more consistent supply, because supply is an issue, and secondly, the quality of water in that area. In the south of the island too, in Vieux Fort, water is a problem. I must admit that the situation is not as bad as it was before, because we have more consistent water and the quality of our water too is very good. But what is happening to deal with the quality and the supply of water along the east coast going down into Vieux Fort?
Right. Now, the situation in the Dennery area is one that is particularly bad for us at Wasco, historically up to this day. And that is, you know, anytime you have a hydrological event, a rain event in the catchment area of the systems in Dennery, you would have high levels of turbidity. Now, sometimes I must tell you that the levels of turbidity that you would get coming into your tap and into your homes, you cannot associate it with any rainfall event within the areas that your eyes can see. Meaning that there's no rain around you. There's no rain in your village or locality and so on. That doesn't mean that it's not raining up in the forest and where your intake is. Because over the years, so much deforestation took place. And because over the years, so much activity has gone into those areas, we have disturbed so much that any little rain that hits the ground in those areas would cause a problem. But that's not the real problem for us. The real problem for us is the fact that we do not have the means to treat the water so that we can deliver that water to the people when the water is highly turbid. Because highly turbid water can be treated, but you must have the facility to treat it. So invariably what happens in some instances is before we are able to turn off the taps and so on, or to shut the system down, some of that water would get through the system.
Is there a central unit or central system where Wasco shuts down? Because we hear sometimes that it is raining, or as a result of whatever, Wasco has to shut down.
Yes.
Do you have to physically go to all of these areas?
Yes, physically. You have to physically go and you have to turn the supply off. You have to turn it off so that the turbid water would not get into water that perhaps you have already treated, and more importantly, the turbid water does not get into your plant, whatever the plant is, because in some of those areas, it's only chlorination that we rely upon in the rural water systems. The water redevelopment project is supposed to put a plant in the Dennery area, and that plant is going to have coagulation, flocculation, and filtration, which would then be able to deal with turbid water. Now, importantly for us is that sometimes you try to get the raw water quality to be very, very good, because if the raw water quality is very good, then you do not have a lot of those problems. But then it's a trade-off, because to get high quality raw water, you have to go further and further up into the forest, up the river and so on. And as you go further up the river, you get less and less water. So it's really a trade-off. As you come lower down the river, you get more water. But as you come lower down the river, then you are coming within areas of a lot of activity and areas of deforestation and things like this. So the soil cover is different, it gets disturbed more easily, so you pick up all of that stuff and so on, and all the turbidity and so on comes through the system, and so it's difficult for you to treat, so you have to turn the system off, allow the turbidity level to drop, and then you can then begin to treat the water and supply the water. So the redevelopment project is supposed to take all of that into consideration and redress the situation.
Sure. Where are we right now with the project? Is this another project that is still in the phase of a study?
No. Well, firstly, they had to do a study to determine precisely where to get the water from, how much water you're going to get, where to site the plant, the pumping requirements, you know, the raw water lines, how to place them, how to run them, what size, and all of that stuff had to be done first to advise the design and things like this. Now, that has been largely complete now, except some geotechnical investigations that are ongoing now and some surveys in order to complete the study and the design. Hopefully that should be completed soon, and most importantly is the financing side of it. After this is done, is to get the financing for it. And Viewfort is the same too as well, except that Viewfort has progressed a little faster because Viewfort geotechnical and surveys have been completed long before the Dennery one, because obviously in the Dennery area where the water and the plant and so on, there are some geotechnical issues there that have to be addressed.
And when you say we have to find the finances, do we have to go to the market and raise funds for this, or do we have secured donors to bring this project to life?
Well, the Ministry of Finance is actually spearheading that effort with respect to finding sources, or the source of financing for both projects. As I sit here now, I know that the CDB is considering financing, or will be considering at its meeting in December, considering the application for financing the Viewfort project. With respect to the Dennery project, then there are some options on the table that are being considered by the Ministry of Finance now. And I would imagine at the right time, we would then know precisely how this one will be financed.
The phone lines are lighting up, 452-7347. This is the number to dial. We have in studio Mr. Vincent Hippolyte, who is the Managing Director of Wasco. Good night, thank you for staying in touch.
Good night.
Hello, good night.
Yes, good night.
To you, JD, and to your guest. Mr. Hippolyte, you mentioned earlier about the work that needs to be done at the John Compton Dam. When the dam was commissioned, correct me if I'm wrong, a number of the water catchment areas were decommissioned. Is there any plan to look at recommissioning those water catchment areas in order to deal with the problem at the John Compton Dam?
Thank you for your question.
Well, the John Compton Dam has its own catchment areas in terms of the areas that actually feed water into the reservoir of the John Compton Dam. But I would think that the caller is asking about, while we are doing the works at the dam, whether we are going to recommission some sources of water in order to make sure that we can continue to supply. And I think that's the point that I was making earlier about water augmentation plan, to make sure that, because the silting, the very nature of the silting suggests that you will be losing water in the process, because you are actually picking up something from a body of water, and as you do so, you will be picking up water too as well. If you go the suction way or you go the grab way, you will be taking out some water. Either way, you take out some water. So you're going to lose water. But the demand for water will not change because you're losing some water in the process. So part of the plan is to make sure that you look at sources of water that you can either reactivate or you can cause to produce more water for you to make up the shortfall, so that demand is met in the north. And I indicated that Vanna, Ravin-Poisson are areas that we've been looking at, and in fact we tested them during this year's drought. Hence the reason why we were able to yeah, maybe deal with the drought in I don't know how to put it now.
It's almost as if each time there was a statement from Wasco speaking about the drought, we'd get a few droplets of rain. And I was saying, keep talking, Wasco, keep talking.
No, but I think the big point that I was trying to make is the fact that because we activated those supplies of water, we were able to deal with the drought in a much better way. I was just trying to look for the words that would actually express it well.
So actually, we did commission.
Yes, we commissioned them, we tested them, and we know how much water they can produce. Now, in addition to this, there is a big body of water in Dedlo, the ministry, under the Ministry of Agriculture, the ownership of the Ministry of Agriculture. It holds about 18 million gallons of water. That is, how do I describe it? You know when you're going up to Twapiton?
Oh, okay.
On that area. You know that area, right? In this area there's a body of water, well, there's a big reservoir there, and it's holding about 18 million gallons of water. So we have been looking at it, and we have actually made contact with the Ministry of Agriculture to say to them that we have an interest in this body of water because we may want to test the water and to bring it onto our line if the water is good enough. Bear in mind that you must test the water first to determine whether you can treat it. And again, I go back to the Mabuya Valley, as I was explaining, and so on. So it's not all water that's around you can treat. All water can be treated. So don't get me wrong. You can treat all the water that you can find anywhere. But you must have the plant to be able to do it. So if we don't have the plant, when we say we cannot treat the water, what we mean is that we do not have the plant that can treat that type of water.
Sure, we'll go back to the phone lines. Good night, thank you for staying in touch.
Good evening.
Hello.
Yes, good evening.
Yeah, I have a concern. It's in the Ticola area.
What area, sorry?
Ticola.
Yeah.
Yeah, this place, there are some areas where Wasa had dug to fix or whatever they did. And this place, it's not paved back or anything like that, especially in the bend area, which is very dangerous.
Yes.
Because the drivers going down to Castries, they go on to the other side. And if a vehicle is coming up, that is dangerous. Because there is a big hole there where the vehicles cannot go in.
Oh, okay.
Thank you so much for that, and I'm sure we're taking notes.
Yes,
we spoke about that a little while ago.
We spoke about that, and areas like this, we'll have to look at putting concrete in the meantime. So, in fact, we are working on a program in the Ministry of Communications on this. But in the interim, we are looking at just applying concrete so that we ease that situation that residents and the public, are complaining about.
Good night. Thank you for calling.
Hi, good evening.
Hello.
Yes, good evening.
I have a question for Mr. Hippolyte.
Sure.
I am calling close to home. I have an issue or question for Mr. Hippolyte with regards to standpipes.
Standpipes?
Some time ago, there's a standpipe in the area where I live was discontinued or disconnected. And this standpipe was serving a number of poor people or underprivileged people in the community.
In which community, caller?
It's in Kaimaji.
Kaimaji, okay.
Yes. And when we did our research, we were told that individuals were carrying water for construction. I found that was rather unfortunate because there's a number of poor people. And if Mr. Hippolyte just look across down the road where he lives, you will see all the houses there. And these people, you are single mothers and all these people, they would carry the water at 4 and at 5 o'clock in the morning. And they just woke up one day and they disconnected the pipe. They discontinued the pipe. So I am wondering what plans do they have for communities where individuals cannot afford to pay Wasco? Are they going to remove the standpipe? Or what do they intend to do? Are you going to say, well, you're going to send them back to the ravine so that we can have the Laji and all these kind of things again?
Thank you for your contribution, caller. Standpipes.
Right. Well, I think the caller would also know that when the standpipe was removed in the Kaimaji area, that we also introduced a program where we connected all the households that were affected as a result. And we entered into arrangements with the households and made connections for them. And I think it was in excess of 16 connections that we had to do in the area there. And the people came in and they signed up the agreements and so on, and they were connected. So it wasn't just disconnecting the pipe, but the disconnection was also followed through with that arrangement for the residents, those people that were affected as a result. So far it has actually worked well. Now, if there is anybody there now that did not take advantage of that, because there are some people that actually took advantage of the situation, meaning that they were not the people that we were targeting.
Okay.
And some people still want to take advantage. And when you look at their situation, that these are not people that you would want to, because obviously they're better able, they have means, and they should really follow the process that's in place for them to be connected. Because the connection that we were making were for the people who were unable. Yeah. And the thinking was, if you provide them with water, then they'll become more responsible in terms of how they use the water. And you build in them a level of responsibility, and we have seen that working.
Indeed. Good night, thank you for calling. Hello, good night.
Good night, Julia.
Hello.
And good night, Vincent.
Yeah, good night.
Vincent,
good night.
Once again, I want to commend you publicly for your posture of good governance. And I don't know, inside, but what I see outside is good. There's accountability and transparency. Where you come down and explain to the public, with the consumers, customers, and clients, you have to be satisfied. Vincent, let me get your candid opinion. What do you say? I should have asked Julia first. Julia,
yes, sir.
What water do you use in your office?
What water do I use in my office? Yeah. I carry a water bottle, so I don't, sometimes I use bottled water, but most times I carry a bottle, and so I fill my water from home.
So you use Wasco water?
Yes, sometimes, and sometimes I use bottled water.
You know what you should do? I think you should do?
Mm-hmm.
If you go to the post office, the manager of the post office actually has a filter on the tap.
Mm-hmm.
And then the people in the post office, they use Wasco water.
Yes.
On the other hand, next door, the Ministry of Finance and the whole building, and all the waterfront, you will find big bottles of water being used by the biggest creditor of Wasco, which is the government of St. Lucia. The owner of Wasco is not using Wasco's water. So therefore, it says to me that how can I, of Joe public, be using Wasco water, drinking Wasco water, when the owner of Wasco, by demonstration, does not demonstrate confidence in Wasco's water by they buying all these big bottles, and you see them loading and offloading. I was in the
I think some of the water is still Wasco's water.
What's that?
I think some of the water that we are purchasing that is packaged and bottled is still Wasco's water, but that's for another show.
It's not Wasco's. It's Wasco's water, because imagine you have a guy who produces water in a place in Gozili, one of the driest parts of St. Lucia. There's no stream of producing water.
Yes,
water.
That's why I was telling you that I think it is still Wasco's water.
Then, our leaders, our ministries, right? Ministry of Commerce, all about finance. They are buying bottled water, not using Wasco's water. So I want to challenge you. Go to the post office. See what is being done there, right? Mm-hmm. It's one of the government agencies, departments, that is using Wasco's water. And therefore, all what I heard Vincent said is that who they owing, etc. You don't say who's owing them. I know government has been always the biggest owner, right? I'm saying debtor to Wasco. Yet, the government is not leading by example. The owner is not leading by example. So therefore, when they want to sell Wasco, etc., and Wasco has all big debt, it's because the person who owes Wasco the most money, right, who owns Wasco, is not buying Wasco water, right? And I want you to think of it, etc. And for your PR, Vincent, go to the post office, use them, right? That is in. I think I should say that.
Yes, we know your voice. We know your voice. You have a distinct voice, so we know it's you.
Yes, Julia.
Thank you so much. Yes, and the use of Wasco's water. Now that the caller has brought this up. It is something that I've wondered about a lot. You go to some of the other islands and you notice that there is a very big rainwater harvesting program. Right. And the thinking is that you encourage people to use the rainwater for the domestic use, to flush the toilets, to clean the house, and so on. I've always thought, why is it that we use the very same water that would cost Wasco so much to process and to purify and to ensure that, you know, it's good quality, it's potable, and so on? We have that very same water going through our bathroom right into our toilet, and this is what we use to flush our toilets every day. And when you talk about the cost of producing the water and what the water is being used for, then certainly this has to be a concern for Wasco.
Well, Wasco, as a good corporate citizen, if I may take it from that angle, considers that too. Wasco is in the business of producing and selling water, and if it sells water, then you pay it for the water that it has sold to you. But looking at the situation with surface water in St. Lucia today, and what we have done to our forests and everything around us, and how the surface water is behaving in terms of you have certain rainfall patterns, and a lot of rain comes down, and you have quick runoff, and you don't have a lot of water after that. So you must now have big reservoirs, you must be able to hold a lot more water and so on, if you're going to continue to rely on surface water, because the runoffs are quick now, as opposed to the rivers holding water for a long time. But putting that aside now, you have a situation where people are using processed water, which has a huge cost to it, pumping costs, all kinds of costs. This is expensive water. And they're using it for things that are not so critical. If you look at the reports that Wasco has, and this is why I make the point that, you know, Wasco gets a bashing, but Wasco doesn't speak about some good things. And I mean, we don't, maybe, and I know that my guys are not going to be happy, my managers and my workers at Wasco, if I don't say anything about the wastewater side, because remember that we're also about sewage, yes, right? Yes. And oftentimes they say, well, you spoke and you said everything, but you only speak about water. I say, well, I was the guest of someone, and that person only asked me questions about water, right? So I can't be rude and say, hold on, I don't want any more questions on water because I'm just a guest. But Wasco has gotten a few things right. Yeah. And the quality of water coming from the John Compton Dam and Hill 20, if you look at the reports, they're indicating that the quality of the water that comes from those two facilities are very good. And in fact, when you look at our own reports, our compliance ratio is very high. Now, in some areas, you find that we have some problems, like in the Dennery area and in some rural communities. We still have some problems, and that's associated. And our water is okay. No, the water is okay too. Now, the reason for that is because of the treatment. Again, I come back to the treatment. So it is not so much the quality of water that is coming through, but whether you can treat the water. Now, treatment has cost. The more difficult the water is in terms of quality, raw water is, the more expensive it's going to be to treat that water. If the water is of very good quality, then the less expensive. The John Compton Dam water is very good quality that's coming in there. Raw water, extremely good quality of water because of where it's coming from. And you don't have human habitation, you don't have a lot of activities up there, except of course snakes and so on. So that's okay, maybe that's a good thing. Lots of snakes up there, so people don't go there. Yes, right. Yes. So maybe that's a good thing. So you find that now we are talking to the department, the DCA and the Ministry of Physical Planning, I think it is, and saying to them that we really need to come back to the table again, and we need to look at what we do, what we say, how we respond to those dynamics now. Maybe when a person applies for permission to build, we want to see, or we should make it mandatory for the person to have 2 plumbing system in the house, and yes. Everybody must now design in such a way where they are going to hold and store rainwater. Must have a cistern or something, and say you then put that water. But then the Ministry of Health has to come into the picture because you know the way things work. Somebody goes and have a cistern because you tell them to do so, and next they start drinking that water, they fall sick, and so it's not so easy. But I'm saying that the world has done it in many places, and we can sit down and we can figure it out, and we can borrow from what other people have done, other countries have done, and we can fashion something that responds to our particular situation today.
I agree, because given where we are now, I really don't think that we should be spending so much money to treat and process water that would be used to flush the toilet at the end of the day. I think we can do different. Good night. Thank you for calling.
Good night, Mrs. Julia Emmanuel.
Good night.
Yes, good night. Yes, good night.
Mr. Hippolyte, I wish to ask you a question. I'm making a contribution in terms of customer service.
Yes.
I know what Wasco has gone through, and you'll have made some serious decisions in terms of collecting revenue.
Yes.
But I remember a great customer service that was given before, in terms of one being served with a notice of disconnection. Now, this has stopped. Now, what I'm saying, Mr. Hippolyte, why has it stopped? And don't you think that it should be returned? I mean, there are many, I could think of different examples or reasons why someone may have defaulted on paying a bill and incurring arrears. There are persons who could probably be hospitalized, or persons who have left the island or something. And also probably because of certain work constraints, persons who may have just forgotten. I think at the time when we used to be notified that we're going to be disconnected, it was a good form of discretion on Wasco's part. So I'm asking, don't you think it should return, or why was it stopped?
Thank you so much, caller.
Well, I think the call, two things. One is that we have to be fair and have to recognize that the bill itself provides you with that warning. It is on the bill. It tells you that you have a duty to pay your bill on time, and it says to you that if you don't pay, when the disconnection will take effect. Now, customers, including myself, we have a duty to ourselves, which means that we must make sure we do the things that we have to do. Because if we don't do it, then there are consequences.
Especially when we can do it.
Especially when we can do it. Because as we have also said, Wasco needs money too.
You love that tagline.
But it is very true.
Yes.
Because sometimes when people are saying, well, don't collect the money, it's okay, let people forget. Let people be busy, as the caller said. Some people forget, some people busy, some people have other things to do. But a lot of these people who forget, busy, and have other things to do are buying cell phones and are topping up and are doing all of those things. Now I'm saying that, yeah, you may consider that to be important. But if Wasco does not get a certain amount of revenue, then Wasco cannot continue to provide the service, because the suppliers will not provide it with the chemical that it needs, will not provide it with the parts that it needs to repair the pumps, and yet that same customer would demand of Wasco to be able to produce the water. And as Wasco don't collect the revenue, which Wasco needs now to be able to procure the things that it requires to supply you with the water. And those people you're buying from will not give you the time. Will not say, because people are not paying you on time. And thirdly, and very lastly, as I speak here now, Wasco's receivables is $18 million. And it was much higher than that. $18 million, meaning that there is $18 million out there. People were simply not paying Wasco. $18 million. Now that we have a more responsible measure in place, which says that, well, aggressive and responsible. If I have sold you something and you're enjoying it, you're consuming it, you have a duty to pay for it, because I need that money for me to continue to provide it to you. And it is your duty, not mine. It is your duty to pay attention to it. I will give you notice, and I have placed it on the bill. If you ask me to do a lot more than that, you're asking me to incur more cost, because for me to place notices and drive all over the place and do that, then it increases cost, and then I will go to the commission and say, you need to increase the tariff because I'm incurring higher cost.
Don't do that.
Precisely. So I'm saying, when you put all of that together, then you say, customer, you have a duty. Your duty is to pay your bill. You know that. You know that. You know that. So that is a duty. When you don't pay your bill, it's a choice you exercise.
But the reminders are right there. I mean, on the radio, on the television, I hear, as often as I hear an SNS ad, I hear Wasco needs money too, and I hear Wasco announcing a disconnection program for the areas of so. Even though my community is not called, it really jolts you and say, oh my gosh, have I paid my bill? But speaking about bills and costs, myself, for example, I'm a Wasco customer. I pay my bills monthly, but I've never seen a bill. The bill comes, or by the time the bill gets there, I have already paid the bill. And I say to myself, what is the use? You are incurring a cost by producing that bill and sending it to me monthly. Either the system at the post office is so slow that I get it 2 months after. In fact, just last week I received mail from Scotiabank and it is dated August. And I wonder why really would they be wasting my time, wasting the resources of the state through the post office by even sending it to me when I've already gone so long and done my business anyway. Lime announced that they're moving in the direction of electronic bills, and so this is an option. If you want to go in and not receive the bill, you can go in to do it. Is Wasco looking to go in that direction?
Yes, we are. In fact, we are in the process of finalizing a new customer information system that will actually upgrade our service in that regard. So we know that this is the way to go. We know this is where we must go. But we must also go and get there and not leave the people behind.
Yes.
Because while you can do it, there are some people that would still rely on getting the bill.
Thank you so much for saying that, because this is one of the difficulties that I had with the announcement made by Lime. We'll take a final call. Good night. Thank you for staying in touch.
Hello, good night. Question.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, Mr.
Hello? We've lost that caller. We'll take another call. Good night. Thank you for calling.
Yes, good night.
Yes, good night.
That Wasco has a fairly high electricity bill because you all have to constantly use pumps to get water to the communities. Does Wasco have any intentions to reduce its electricity consumption by, let's say, using more gravity flows where you actually pump water to, let's say, tanks in elevated areas and then let the water flow by gravity to various communities?
Very good question, Colin.
Well, that's a very good question, and in fact, we are doing that, but we cannot get away from pumps because, again, you use the word pumps. You say pump up, so we still have to pump. But just to tell you how bad it is, I said earlier on that the electricity cost to Wasco is between $850,000 to $1.2 million a month. And I think Wasco may be Luceleg's biggest customer, paying that kind of money, because in a year you can nearly pay Luceleg $18 million, 10, 18, up to $18 million, depending on what the surcharge is doing.
Yes.
So we are really a significant customer of Luceleg. The dam alone, the John Compton Dam, the monthly cost, electricity or power cost for the John Compton Dam ranges between $320,000 to nearly $400,000 a month. Now, if you add the John Compton Dam, which has 3-4 pumps operating at any one time, you add Sarah pump into it, and you add the pumps at Cicero, and you add the pumps on the Morn to it, and all of that is just one system, you're up to nearly $500,000. Now, $500,000 from 1.2 million or from $850,000 a month, it gives you an idea of how costly it is just to operate the John Compton Dam. And yes, what we do is we try to get as much water as possible to flow by gravity, because the pumping from the John Compton Dam is to take the water all the way to Sarat, and then the water flows by gravity from Sarat to the Cicero plant, where it is treated, and then it is pumped to the Morn and to other places. And so a series of pumps then begin onto various tanks and so on in series and in parallel, so that we can get water to the public.
But your minister is a minister for energy, science and technology,
Yes.
and he has been doing some wonderful things in the area of diversifying our electricity portfolio. So we
Yes.
have renewable solar, wind. You speak about it. Is there anything, have we really explored the possibility of trying to diversify, your electricity through going through the John Compton Dam? Is it even possible?
Yes, well, in fact, it's interesting you raise this, and usually programs like this, it's nearly impossible to cover everything because we try to pre-see and be quick.
Yes.
And we never do a good
We
job.
are already out of time, yes.
Almost always say that in the end that, I really didn't do a good job. I didn't do justice to anything because there's so much to say.
So much more, yes.
In addition to the silting and doing the study on the John Compton Dam, there are 2 additional studies that have been carried out simultaneously. One is to determine the possibility for hydroelectric power. as a consequence of having that body of water and the energy that you can generate from water flowing out of the dam. And the Germans are financing this, and the Germans are studying this. The word study comes up again.
Yes.
The world that is better equipped than us, before they do anything, they study it first. So we must have the attitude and say there must be something about doing a study first.
Yes.
And the idea, like we did in the past, just go and do it. And somehow it's going to work because we are paying for it left, right, and center. The second thing is photovoltaic. We are also, and the Germans are also looking at this. So they are looking at renewables for us. And they're saying that if we can find electricity from PV and from hydropower, we may be able to tell you that this is so much you can find and reduce your reliability or consumption from loose lake. The issue for us is how do we then deal with loose lake in terms of the power that we may generate. We don't have the answers yet, but these studies are ongoing.
Yes.
Because everybody realizes, and the Germans are working very closely with us now, that we really need to do something about our power costs. Not just the power cost alone, but when you have all those pumps, then your maintenance cost.
Yes.
So power is just one aspect of it, and it's up to 1.2. But what's about the maintenance now of all those pumps, 125 pumps?
Wow. I really do not envy you, and I understand that you have a great responsibility on your shoulder. And in fact, the minister said that your responsibility would be to transform Wasco and to place Wasco on a path, a sustainable path, because prior to your entry, the cry was that Wasco is not even able to purchase a length of PVC pipe. And now we are speaking about responsibility in terms of greater cost, trying to diversify the portfolio, ensuring that we are providing water to so many other communities. I think just as we close, we can't take any more calls because we are really out of time. But I think the persons from the Mabuya Valley, that community who are listening, in fact, when I announced that you would be on the program, I got many calls and many messages from that community. And I did promise that before I close the program, I would put in a plea. I know that we are working on it, that you have been in the Mabuya Valley, you have addressed the residents to let them know where we are at this time. But I would love to close the program with some reassurance, to let them know that Wasco is aware of the problem. Wasco, along with the government of St. Lucia, is currently working to address the problem. And it is not one of the situations where we would be in the commissioning phase indefinitely or for an extended period of time.
Absolutely. And I think in closing, I want to say something on this. But before that, just to be clear,
sure.
I don't want us to focus on this current administration alone or management of Wasco. The past management of Wasco made a contribution which enabled us to pick up from that point to what we are doing today. A lot of what we are doing today would not have been possible if the management that was there before hadn't done a fairly good job. So I don't want that not to be recognized, because we recognize it internally.
Sure, great point.
So it's always very important, because sometimes we get carried away in ourselves and in the current, and we forget those who actually brought us to this point and enable us to perform. And when I leave, it would be the same. So it's not me, but it is those before, and it's me along with a team that is trying to make a contribution. So everybody makes a contribution and move on. So I want it to be taken in that way. So it's not me. The focus must never be on me, because it's not me by myself. I cannot do anything. But together with people of like mind, then we can do something, or we can try our best to do something. Now back to the people of Mabuya, Valley and Dennery area. I must tell them that we are very sensitive to their situation down there. They have been suffering for many years now, and we are aware of that. And hence the reason why this project was born, and it's moving apace. I must tell them this. All the design work and where the water is going to come from, the type of plant, the amount of water that will be processed and released into the community, where the plant will be sited, all of that has already or nearly completed. And just so that they fully understand what I mean by the geotechnical investigation. The geotechnical investigation is to advise on the soil, and what the soil can bear, and whether there is need for any particular remedial works to be done in order so that the soil condition as it is will be able to take the load of a plant on it and this and that and so on. So it's all of those things that are being done now and being finalized now to advise the final design. And the financing side of it, which is another angle that is being worked out, the Ministry of Finance is actively finalizing the financing source. Now, I know that there are a few sources, but then I would leave it to the Ministry of Finance, I would leave it to the ministers to speak about precisely where the financing is going to come from. But all I can say is that with respect to the technical aspects, Wasco is fairly satisfied that we have nailed it down fairly well. And in short order, I think there will be the announcement of us going out to tender once the financing is okay to get the jobs done. So again, I say that if the Viewford project starts before the Denry project, don't feel too bad about it. That is just because you have two different projects and they presented some slightly different challenges going forward.
On that note, we've come to the end of our program. I thank you so much for joining us tonight. We'll be back in next week, Monday, with another interesting and exciting edition of In Touch. You can continue to send your messages. Of course, I can always forward them to Mr. Hippolyte. I want to thank especially our callers tonight. I will remind Mr. Hippolyte of the Ticoulon area, particularly because the issue we spoke about with the road and digging up the road is an issue that concerns me greatly. And in fact, our Minister for Infrastructure has spoken about it in the past. So I was very relieved to hear Mr. Hippolyte indicate that the Ministry of Infrastructure will be signing a memorandum of understanding with Wasco so that we can address this issue. I want to wish you a pleasant and safe week. See you next week, Monday, with another edition of In Touch. Good night.